Thanks, Valerie, and welcome everybody to another record-breaking crowd, and thanks so much for your enthusiasm about today's topic. We're thrilled to be providing this series of webinars around communication and really hope they'll be useful for ongoing staff and volunteer training via the recordings. Today's presenter, Trish Lohr, is Director of Applied Research and Behavior for the ASPCA's Shelter Research and Development Team. Trish holds a Master of Science degree in Animal Behavior from the University of Exeter in England. She's a certified pet dog trainer, is SAFER certified, and is currently Vice Chair of the Board of Directors of the Association of Pet Dog Trainers. For over 15 years, Trish has been working with shelter animals and has trained dogs professionally since 1999. For several years, Trish was the Director of Animal Behavior at the ASPCA's 92nd Street Shelter in New York City, and worked as a behaviorist for the ASPCA's Animal Behavior Center in Urbana, Illinois. Trish has been deployed to work with animals from hoarding and cruelty cases, has helped assess dogs from dogfighting raids, and assists shelters in crisis. Trish also writes for the ASPCA's Virtual Pet Behaviorist and ASPCA Pro. Moderating the chat today are staff members Dr. Emily Weiss and Heather Mohan-Gibbons. They'll be keeping an eye out for your questions and will be typing their responses back to the group. So with those introductions, it is my pleasure to turn the session over to Trish.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I've unmuted correctly. Welcome. I'm really excited about all of the enthusiasm we have around this series on canine communication and handling skills. Those of you who have not attended the first two webinars, I strongly encourage you to visit them on aspcapro.org. It will really help with some of the things that you're learning today, just to give you a little more background. When we first designed this series, we realized there's a lot of things that people need to know to avoid triggering aggression in dogs. Reading body language was our first webinar. It's a huge part of the skill set. And that's why Heather started off with her canine communication webinar. In the second webinar, we introduced body language work as well as some really important leash skills, which we'll go over briefly here. And once you have all of these pieces together, you're going to be much less likely to trigger aggressive behavior in the first place. But if you do, you will learn how to defuse it before things get to the point where a bite is imminent. So those of you in the audience, raise your hand if you have ever been bitten by a dog. I'm sure we have a few of you. And how many of you saw it coming? This is something that I've noticed is dogs are so quick with their mouths. It's really hard to avoid a bite if they have decided that it will happen. That's why the prevention part of this series is so important. Whenever I've actually been bitten, I end up looking at a bleeding body part thinking, wow, I've just been bitten, rather than seeing it coming and being able to avoid the bite. So this is why knowing how to read the precursors to aggression and learning how to use your body and your leash correctly are going to keep you a lot safer than even the fastest reflexes. So this webinar will focus primarily, after the review part, on teaching you what to do if a dog becomes over-aroused or aggressive. What I'm trying to do is give you a range of ideas that will help you quickly come up with some things to do if you find yourself in a bad situation. And and we really hope that that won't happen in the first place. And I'm glad to see some of you haven't been bitten. That's great. So if possible, you should have a slip lead with you, which is just like a noose that goes around the dog's neck with a ring on it. If you don't have one handy right now, we're going to send you the recorded version of this later, and in webinar 2 we also teach some leash skills, and it would be really helpful to practice along with the video. So here are some things we're going to learn. We're going to go over body language, some signs of escalating aggression, a few leash skills. We're going to go over how to make an emergency muzzle. That's the part that you're going to need your leash for. We'll talk a little bit about dogs who grab the leash playfully, and then we'll talk about dogs who come up the leash less playfully. And lastly, we'll talk about what to do if an off-leash dog approaches you. We can move on to the next slide. What I'd like you to do is before you get to the point where you're looking at this many really shiny white teeth, you'll see some of the more subtle signs that a dog's becoming upset with you. Uh-oh, you can go back to that slide. So you'll see some of the more subtle signs that a dog's becoming upset and that the aggression is about to escalate to this point. If you handle a dog properly, you shouldn't ever need to see this picture. So now we can move on to the next slide. Sorry, Valerie. So we'll start with a few body parts. These are just the highlights. As I said, there are many more details in Heather's webinar. But the main things I look at are the shape and the pupil size to start with. So you can see the dog at the top has the squinty, almond-shaped eyes, a more relaxed dog. And as a dog becomes more tense and more likely to aggress, the eyes will become more round. Move on to the next one. The mouth is, of course, the part that is most likely to bite you, so it's very important to keep an eye out for the first signs of stress in the mouth area. A couple that not everybody knows are the lip lick and the stress yawn, and you may see some of these in videos later on. The dogs don't usually yawn because they're bored. It's more often a sign of stress, and this dog on the right, really often you'll hear that high-pitched squeak in the back of their throat when they're yawning. This is not a tired dog. This is a stressed dog. We can move on to the next one. Here are some more signs to watch for in the mouth. The dog on the left, you can see he's panting and relaxed, and then he suddenly shuts his mouth. And you can look at the length of the lip, too. As the dog is becoming more upset, the lip will get shorter. So if a dog is panting and suddenly stops panting, that's something to pay attention to, particularly if it's hot out and they need to pant. And you can see the dog on the right is showing what's called an offensive pucker. The lip is sort of in a C shape, which brings the top lip up, and you can see all those lovely wrinkles on the top of the nose. I'll very often watch for very subtle wrinkles before it gets to that point as the face becomes more tense. So we can move on to the next slide. So there are a few more signs that aggression may be about to escalate. One that a lot of people don't understand at first is the freeze. And often when I see a report of someone who bit, or of a dog who bit somebody suddenly and without warning, I wonder if the dog gave a really clear freeze first. Because this is something that primates, us, we are not really wired to understand. If it seems like the dog is doing nothing, but those of you who have multiple dogs, you may have seen one dog who is lying down and chewing, another dog walks too closely, and the dog suddenly stops chewing. And to another dog, they see that's a threat. They will move away and give the dog some space, but we humans don't always see that. So pay attention to those. You may see some in the videos coming up. Another thing I look at is the stiffness of the body, and we're going to show you some videos that show you the difference between a really loose body and a really stiff body. It's all on a continuum. It's not like the dog is either really loose or really stiff, but as the body becomes more stiff, the probability of aggression goes up. We've talked about the lip lick and the lip curl, that first little wrinkle at the top. And of course, by the time you get to the offensive pucker, it's quite obvious that aggression is about to escalate. So just think of it as a continuum from the really loose, wiggly, paw-lifting, friendly dog, which you're going to see in the next video, and the stiff as a bored, frozen dog. The video that we're going to show you next is going to be a little bit puzzling to some of you because this dog is showing her teeth. This is called a submissive grin. The first time I saw that, I was nervous that the dog was going to bite me. It was but this is actually a very friendly gesture. Not all friendly dogs smile, but this one, the things I want you to watch for are her eyes. See how squinty or round they are. I want you to look at her tail, see how loose and wiggly and how she's actually wagging her whole body with her tail. And I want you to also look at paw raises, a lot of dancing with the front feet. Those are really affiliative signs. So Valerie, if you can play the video? Is this going to
Sure.
go full screen?
And everyone's going to notice their screen flickering for a moment while we make the videos go full screen.
So there's the smile. So what shape of eyes did you see? What did you see with the tail? How stiff do you think that body would be if you could feel it? We can play that one more time because that's just such a charming video. She's almost got her eyes closed. She's squinting so hard. So in the contrast, we're going to look at the other end of the spectrum. I want you to count how many freezes you see in this clip. And imagine how stiff this dog would feel if you were to run your hand along his back. Does everybody see that? Those are really clear threats to another dog. To someone who hasn't taken these webinars, it may look like the dog's not doing anything when that hand approaches. But that is a really classic freeze. There were a couple of them in there. So we'll show you some body language things you can do to help show a dog that you're no threat, particularly a dog who is fearful or who may become aggressive. You're far less likely to provoke aggression if you use your body more like the picture on the left. You can see the person is squatting down and looking away, and this is about as non-threatening as you can get. The only thing that she could do is turn sideways to the dog to make herself a little less threatening. But you can see that the dog is not at all worried and is just walking past. Now, in contrast, on the right, this person is in no danger. He does know the dog well. But if this was an unknown dog, this would be a very risky body posture. He's leaning over the dog. He's making direct eye contact. He's making himself very large. And you can see even this very friendly dog is a little intimidated by the tail position. So this is not a particularly safe way to approach an unfamiliar or fearful or potentially aggressive dog. So you can talk softly, just try to make yourself as small and non-threatening as possible. So we'll move on to the next one. So we spoke a little bit about leash handling. This is one of the things that I read about frequently. It really makes a big difference, especially when you're handling dogs who might become aggressive if you are holding your leash correctly. So if the leash will go over your thumb, and then you can fold it like an accordion up and down in your hand. This is a particularly thick leash, so it's not accordion very many times. If you're using a thinner leash, you can make smaller loops. But you can see at the end of the video, all it takes is releasing the leash and gripping it again, and you suddenly have the full length of leash. So this is really helpful if a dog starts acting aggressively and you need to get distance. You can still hold the leash but get distance. So Valerie, if you can play that. There's the thumb loop, a couple of accordions. And if you hold the leash against your belly button with one hand on top of the other, that will give you the most strength. Kind of think of like you're holding a baseball bat. So if you have your leash with you, you can practice along with the video. If you don't have your leash, we'll send you this tomorrow and you can practice along with that. But it's a really good idea to practice and get to the point that you can do this quickly and safely, so that if you need to get a dog a little closer to you, you can do it. And it also gives you the option of being able to release once and let the dog get further away. So I'll move on and talk about body position a little bit on the next slide. So we reviewed this a little bit in the last webinar. It's really important if you need to have a firm hold on a dog to put your legs shoulder width apart, as you can see on the right. And if you point your hip in the direction the dog is pulling, you'll find it gives you a lot of strength. So I've got my hands braced against my belly button, And you can see that the dog isn't able to pull nearly as well as she is at the one on the left. So we can move on to the next one. We'll talk a little bit about equipment. We'll go into more detail on a little later on equipment. For a lot of shelter dog handling, we'll use a slip lead. This is your standard animal control type slip lead with a really large ring. There are some pros and cons to using a slip lead. The things I like about a slip lead is that you don't have to get as close to the dog to be able to just drop a rope over their head. There's also no fumbling with clips or buckles around the dog's face. And you can also remove the lead without being able to get too close to the dog. So some cons with the slip lead: if it doesn't have a lock like some of them do, you will need to keep a little bit of upward tension on the leash so that the dog will not get out. If you have a dog who walks beautifully with you on a loose lead, it will loosen around them. And so it's not ideal for teaching a dog to walk on a loose leash, and you do need to know how to use it properly, and there's more detail in our previous webinar. Many shelters use a regular buckle collar or a martingale collar with a regular clip leash, and this is just fine for dogs you know well, who are not overly fearful, and dogs who are not likely to aggress towards you. So in the next slide, we go into the figure 8 leash. This is the reason a lot of the shelter slip leads have a clip on the end of it, is so that you can use the clip to release a dog who is not easy to handle or whose face you don't want to get too close to. I don't usually clip it like that until I'm right back at the kennel, but with some dogs you need to do it in advance. If we move on to the next slide, it will show it in a little more detail. This one doesn't have a clip at the end of it, so what I've done is I've attached a leather leash to the ring, so that if I needed to get the slip lead off this dog, I could do it from a distance. And you can see on the left side how the leash is being released and taken off without my hands anywhere near the dog's face. This is kind of hard to understand without seeing it, so if we move on to the next slide, you'll see me putting this wiggly pit bull back in her kennel without having to get anywhere close to her. And you can see how fast and efficient this technique can be. So usually I'll clip it when the dog is paying attention to something else. So she's just got back into the kennel, she's looking towards her friends. I'm going to quickly snap this on, and then I'm going to put her back in her kennel, and you can see I don't have to put my hands in the kennel, I don't have to put my face in the kennel, I don't have to fumble with unbuckling a collar or taking a clip off. So Valerie, you can play that. So notice I'm keeping the leather leash very, very loose. You don't want to inadvertently take the lead off. I'm bracing the door with my foot and pulling it off her head, and I didn't have to get anywhere close to her. She's not a dangerous dog. She's just an excitable pit bull. So you can show that again. But it's important to practice with this, because the worst thing you can do is pull on the wrong leash and let the dog loose while they're out. You do need to give it a bit of practice. And in our second webinar, we give you plenty of opportunity to practice with this and go into a little more detail. So we can move on to the next one. So here are some other equipment options. On the top right is a martingale collar. I really like these. We use them in doggy daycares where I've worked. And the nice thing about them is that a dog can't back out of them easily. If they're adjusted properly, the little ring will tighten, or the little cloth circle you can see at the bottom will tighten as the dog pulls. So it's really good for sight hounds or dogs with muscular necks and small heads. The disadvantage is that you can't quickly get it off them. The buckle collars at the bottom are a pretty common choice with pet owners. Again, you need to make sure they're fitted correctly, and a lot of dogs can get out of them even if they're fitted correctly, so they're not my favorite for shelter work. The one that we use at the shelter that I worked at last was the clip martingale. They're a little harder to find, but they have the advantage being a martingale, but they have that quick release. I've seen dogs get a jaw caught in that circle, and if you're able to quickly release it, you can get them out of it. You don't have to cut the collar off of them. So that's a nice choice. So we can move on a little to the next one. I'm not going to go into huge detail on catch poles. These are sometimes called rabies poles or control poles. That is probably a whole presentation in itself. I will tell you that the best animals I have met on deployments rarely need to use these. It's really amazing what a good handler can do with a slip lead and good rope skills, but sometimes they're necessary. There are dogs that you just can't get close enough to. But if you are going to use a catch pole, you need to be very well trained in their use. You need to practice on stuffed dogs, and because it's really easy when your adrenaline's up and you're trying to move an aggressive dog, it's really easy to pull too hard on that little wire, and you can actually choke a dog with this. So very, very use with caution. And the other thing I'm going to add is they should never be used with cats. So we're coming up to the part of the webinar where you're going to need your slip lead, so you might want to get it out now if you've brought one along. And we're going to talk about how to make a leash muzzle. This is not something that you need to use often, but when you do need it, it's a really, really great skill to have, and it's a great idea to practice the mechanical skills. As you can see in the pictures, there are a number of different ways to wrap the dog's nose, and in a pinch, if you get the leash around it a couple of times, it'll probably hold it closed. But knowing how to do it a little more effectively with a slip lead is really helpful. We've used these on deployment. These are both hoarding raids, and the dogs had never been on a leash before, so you couldn't just slip a leash over it and pull them out because they're going to gator roll on the leash and chew at it and hurt themselves trying to get off the leash. So it's actually more humane to put a leash muzzle on. You don't want them freaking out and trying to get away when they're this close to your face. But the situation that normal people may need to use this in is if your own dog is injured and you need to pick it up and put it in the car, because if your dog has a broken leg or something, even the nicest dog may snap at you if you pick them up and they're in pain. So it's a really good idea to make sure that the muzzle is closed. So if we move on to the next slide, we'll show you how to do it. So what you're going to do for practice is you're going to put the slip lead around your ankle, and that is going to be your dog's neck. And I have people practice this on their feet lots and lots and lots before they do it on a real dog. And if you have a stuffed dog, that's a great thing to practice on too. But you can see the leash is around her neck, and then what we're doing is making a little P with the loose part of the leash, putting it over her nose. And it almost makes it into like a gentle leader. In this way, you can lead a dog this way, but you can also keep it tight or put another wrap in it and pick the dog up. So if we go on to the video, you can see what it looks like being put on. So again, this has the slip lead around the dog's neck first. Uh-oh, that's the wrong video. That was the right picture of the video. There it is. You just slip it around the dog, and this is done in slow motion. When you've had a little more practice, it'll get smoother. You can see the leash is made into a P. It might be a Q if you're on the other side of the dog. Goes over the nose, and then tighten it up. So if it was done that way, that's kind of like a little halter that you can lead the dog on, but you can also keep that that end part tight and pick the dog up. So if you'd like to give that a bit of practice, I put an extra slide in for you to practice on your foot. And this webinar is being recorded. It'll be sent to you tomorrow. So if you don't have a slip lead with you, then practice this tomorrow. You can also make a slip lead out of just a regular leash by running the leash through the handle just to make it into a slip lead. So we will move on to the next one. We'll talk a little bit about dogs who play tug with the leash. A lot of shelter dogs find this a lot of fun. It's something some people just say, oh, ignore it, it'll go away. But what I have found is this is a self-reinforcing behavior. Playing tug is piles of fun to dogs. If you're walking the dog for a while, there's lots and lots of opportunity to tug for the whole walk. And the other thing is with some dogs, it can escalate to aggression. So I like to discourage this. And I'll give you a few techniques on the next couple of slides. Okay. The number one thing that I'd like to do is keep the leash at the back of the dog's head. Some of these dogs who like to play tug, the worst thing you can do is put them on a front attached harness, because then the leash is dangling right in front of their faces. Emily can put in a little ad for the Weiss Walkie here, which puts the leash behind the dog's head. That's another good piece of equipment. But I used a leather leash for years in a shelter, and I did not get tooth marks on it just because I kept it out of the dog's face, and they just weren't able to get hold of it. I'll show you what it looks like in action in a video a little later. So if we move on to the next slide, this is another good one for the retriever types who just have to have something in their mouth. A lot of our shelter dogs will just keep a toy outside of their kennel, and a note that says, please take my toy on the walk. And really often they just want a toy to carry. If they have a toy to carry, they won't be carrying the leash. So we can move on. So here's a dog who's grabbing the leash, and you can see how I keep the leash out of his way. This is the tag part of Safer, and as soon as we started playing tag, he saw the leash and he decided to grab it. And I just got it out of his way. You can play that little clip, Valerie. So I'm keeping it up above his head. And he was really not going to stop tugging. That was really fun for him. So I was walking him off to the side where there's a clip on the wall that I can run his leash through. And that will also get him. Then I'm not the thing at the end of the leash. So he's grabbing at it, but he's not able to get it because I'm keeping it out of his way. I can move on to the next slide. So here's a few more things you can try with dogs who like to play tug with the leash. Really often at our shelter, we'll just use a chain leash on them. It's not as nice for the people to hold. You certainly can't easily hold it the way I showed you in the earlier slide. But many dogs will just give up. They don't like to put their mouth on metal. Another thing you can use is a taste deterrent like bitter apple. And the thing to remember about taste deterrents is they tend to evaporate really quickly. So I tend to put it on before every walk. If you can make the leash taste bad for a number of walks, they'll often decide that leashes aren't so delicious and find other ways to amuse themselves. So we can talk a little bit about some safety techniques. So we're moving into the portion of the webinar where we're going to talk about things you can use to stay safe if a dog does become aggressive while you have them out on a leash, or towards the end not on a leash. So if we move on, we'll talk a little bit about kennels. This is a really great picture of good body language in a kennel. The handler is sideways to the dog. He's got his slip lead open. He's got his knee in a spot where he can easily brace the door. If he needed to, he could have a second leash attached to the ring of that slip lead if he thought he was not going to be able to get the dog out and was going to need to retrieve his leash. And it's important to stay calm and quiet. And a lot of people tend to use corrective talk and tell the dog to sit or lie down or stay. And it's just easier to speak quietly and let them know that you're no threat. So we'll move on. We're going to talk a little bit about some more safety techniques. And on the next slide is a great picture of the double leash technique. This is something that we will use sometimes if we need to move a dog that we suspect may become aggressive. And sometimes you can just have a second handler drop a slip lead over the dog's head if they become aggressive while you have them out. And this way, if the dog tries to bite the person on the left, the person on the right can pull them away, and vice versa. This is from the Red Rover website, and apparently this is how they walk all of their dogs, just to, when they're on deployments, to make sure that they can't escape. So this is not actually an aggressive dog, but it can be a really handy technique to be able to move a dog who might become aggressive. I can move on to the next one. And you can see on this picture the importance of the leash skills. This dog is trying to bite me, and he's also got a martingale collar on, which I was very glad of because he couldn't back out of it. So we can move on and watch the So because I had the leash in the accordion, I was able to immediately grab it with my other hand. And it's amazing that you can hold a dog this size away from you with just your leash and your arm straight out to the side. But I think we have that one in slow motion on the next slide. I didn't realize until Heather slowed this down for me that he goes for one arm and the other arm and then my abdomen. But yeah, the straight arm hold is a very effective one. So we can move on to the next one. And that shows you the straight arm hold, and it also shows you the martingale on the dog. You can see how it's tightened, but the dog is not able to back out. So our next slide. This is a similar straight arm hold. This fellow is stronger than I am, so he's only got one hand on the leash, but he's also holding his arm straight out in front of him. This is proper slip lead technique. He's got one hand on each side of the slip lead, and the man on the right is blocking him using a catch pole. He's not actually trying to catch the dog. He's just keeping him from biting his coworker. That is your straight arm hold. So we'll talk a little bit about back ties. Many of the rooms I assess dogs in have a back tie in them. They'll have a ring in the wall, just a big metal ring, and I'll often attach a carabiner to it so that I can just slide the leash into it if I need to move the dog away from me. But this is just something to keep in mind, especially if you're out on a walk. There are many, many things that can be used as a back tie. So you just need to get the leash through something and get the dog away from you, or get the leash around something. And I'll use this sometimes with dogs who are just becoming over aroused, or if they become too strong for me, it can give me a bit of a break. So I think I've got a couple more pictures on the next slide of other impromptu back ties just to get the dog away from you. So these are good things to know if you're walking dogs who get over aroused. And it can also stop them if they're just chewing on the leash. They're not playing tug with you anymore. It takes it away from their face and it's not a game anymore. I can move on to the next slide. There's some more techniques to get more distance from the dog. I love this picture because you can see through the door. But if you step through a door and close the door on the leash, that will give the people in the room some safety as well if the dog was to become aggressive. But just think about getting a little bit more distance. I can move on to the next one. And here are some techniques, particularly if you're threatened by a loose dog, but a lot of these will work with dogs on leash as well. It's really important to stop all movement. Really often your first instinct is to scream and run away, and that's often only going to excite the dog more. So just stopping your movement. Emily calls this the stop, drop, and roll. Stop your movement, drop your eyes, and turn sideways. Roll your body sideways to the dog. And that gives them all of the cutoff signals. You are no threat. You're not engaging. You can cross or lower your arms. With some dogs, making noise helps, and with some dogs, making noise gets them more excited. So, clapping your hands or dropping something or yelling at them, realize that could go either way. These are the first things that I would try, is stopping and dropping. And if you cross or lower your arms, that will sort of make them look less threatening. We can move on to the next one. Whenever I'm walking dogs, I keep some really delicious treats with me. So if a loose dog approaches, the delicious treats have saved me many a time. I just throw them towards the loose dog, and a surprising number will just go on a treat hunt and forget about you. So if you're able to do that, that's great. If you move on to the next slide, this is another great technique I learned from dog walkers, is carry an umbrella. If you are walking in an area where there are loose dogs frequently, just popping an umbrella open, clearly not startling my dog very much in this picture, but a lot of loose dogs, if they see something suddenly getting very big, it's startling enough. And it also gives you something to block them with, especially if you're walking with another dog. So we can move on. The citronella spray is a helpful thing to have around if you're walking in an area where there are loose dogs. You have to be a little bit careful if you're walking your own dog, because it can blow back on your own dog's face. But the nice thing about citronella is it's not as hard on people as pepper spray is. And I try to just spray it in front of a dog's nose, and a lot of dogs really don't like the scent of lemon and will back off with a little bit of a spray.
Hey, Trish, this is Susan. Maybe I
Yes.
can pop in a question
Sure.
that Valerie just posed from registration. And the question asked, how to improve the human-dog connection when walking highly distractible or environmentally centered dogs. Any tips?
Well, whenever I'm walking a dog that I don't know, I like to carry some really, really delicious treats with me. When I was at the shelter in New York, we had a liver treat it was a soft treat with a bit of garlic in it, and we called it crack. The dogs really, really, really liked it. So if I've got a pack of that, often what I'll do before we even get walking is stand still and reward the dog every time they look in my general direction. Your goal in walking dogs is to be more interesting than the ground, and that can be hard. Some dogs are not as food motivated as others, but I find with the right treat, and sometimes walking them right before their dinner time when they're hungry again, but I'll just reward them every time they look in my general direction, and many dogs decide that I'm more interesting than the ground or the environment. If they're distracted by other dogs across the street, I just get more distance. So, put a car between me and the other dog, or walk the other way and just get a little more space.
Great, thanks.
Sure. So here are a few more ideas for if a dog is trying to bite you. If you need to move away, do it slowly. This is a great photo of putting something between you and the dog. That is a cattle trough that just happened to be upside down in the area, and you can see the handler is getting that between her and this dog. And another thing that you can do is you can feed the dog something. If you are wearing a coat or carrying a backpack, and a dog is intent on biting you, sometimes if you can slip out of the coat, they will be happy to bite that instead of you. So there are a lot of things you can have in your toolbox. So you might have a trash can around. I've seen shelter people do amazing things with squeegees to keep dogs away. You can use a chair. If you're agile, you can hop up on a car or a table. If there's water around, sometimes tossing some water will cool things off. So just look at what's in the environment. There will often be something you can use to help you. And so these are the take-home messages from the webinar. the main thing is to pay attention to the dog's body language. Watch the signs that the aggression is about to escalate. It's always better to avoid a bite than to provoke a dog and know the ninja moves it takes to not get bitten. If a dog wants to bite you, typically they will. So it looked like I was faster than that dog in the video, but if he wanted to bite me, he would have been able to. His mouth is faster than my hands. You need to learn to use your leash efficiently and safely. Please go back to the second webinar and learn some more of the leash skills. And it's a good idea to practice making emergency muzzles. You just don't know when you're going to encounter an injured dog, even if you don't work with these kinds of dogs. It's a really handy skill to have, and you've got all the tools in this webinar. So that is all I have for you today, but thank you very much for attending. And if there are any more questions that popped out that my moderators didn't catch, I'd be happy to take them now.
Trish, I'm wondering, there's a comment in the chat about getting multiple dogs out of a cage or run, and if you have any tips for calming things down because the dogs seem to feed off the stress and excitement of others.
Yeah, I just got to witness this at a shelter where all of the dogs were co-housed. And it was really interesting. I went in with, there were 2 of us and 3 dogs, and the first time we went in, the person who was helping me get dogs was yelling at them, back, sit, down, and flailing her arms around and pushing at the dogs. And you know, I quietly put a slip lead around the one that I wanted and got it out. But I challenged her to go back in and just be really quiet. And we found I do like to have more than one person if humanly possible. It's one of the toughest things to do, one person going in and taking a dog out of 3. But I would say be really calm, be really quiet, and just quietly get the dog you want. And if you can have a second person to keep the other dogs from escaping as you slip out the door, that's always best.
Great. There's another question about collar recommendations for those dogs who are a bit more delicate, such as greyhounds. Yeah,
most of the Sighthound people I know do use the martingale collars, but they make a thicker martingale collar. They'll often be 1 inch or 2 inches or even thicker than that, and that protects their delicate necks, but it also prevents them from backing out of the collar.
I'm just scanning the chat, so I may be grabbing questions that Dr. Weiss and Heather are answering, but I just want to quickly run down and make sure we've gotten everything. Another question that came up in registration, and this may be coming in another session. What are the best ways to split up, diffuse, stop dog-on-dog aggression?
Oh, there's a good teaser for the next ones in the series. We're going to. I'm not going to give it all away now, but we are going to have webinars on how to introduce dogs properly and also how to defuse things if the dogs do become aggressive. So I'm not going to give it all away here, but there are many things you can do, and it's also something that we would like to provide more training in. It's a bigger question than I can answer right here, right now, with no pictures, videos, or slides.
Fantastic. So thank you so much, Trish. Amazingly valuable information. On your screen right now are coming attractions. I know that a few folks in the chat were asking, is there more content? The next in our Canine Communication series is coming up July 12th. Registration's not quite open yet, but please keep on checking. And we're also going to be rolling out an 8-part series from our Field Investigations and Response team for those of you who are really eager to learn all about that part of our work and how you can get involved. Hope to see you there starting June 19th. And coming up beginning of June, we're going to be talking about reuniting lost dogs with their families and how communities are really making this amazing connection all on Facebook. So hope to see you guys often and back at this same channel. Thanks so much, everybody. See you next time. Thanks, Trish. Thanks, moderators.
Thank you, everyone.